Discuss this issue and more, I'm joined in the studio now by Labor MP Anika Wells.
Hello.
Hello, thanks for joining us. And Liberal Julie and Lisa. Thanks for your time. All right, now I fully acknowledge that neither of you is in the National Party, neither of you was in this party room meeting, not even close, that we're talking about today. But Julie and Lisa, starting with you, 6 months after an election, how can it be that we're already talking about the leadership of one of the two parties that have now formed government?
Well, I don't think anyone's really talking about this. I think this is a matter of interest for the media, and it's a matter of interest for some of our political opponents in the Labor Party.
Speculation.
But look, I think Bridget McKenzie's doing a great job as Agriculture Minister. We're in, one of the worst droughts on record in Australia. She's been playing an active role preparing the farm household allowance changes, which are making a real difference to people on the ground who are suffering the drought. That's what I think most of the coalition MPs are focused on. I've known Bridget for many years. She's doing a fantastic job. When I think about division in this place, I think about the Labor Party divided on tax, divided on renewables, and divided on their own leadership. All
right, we'll talk about the Labor Party in a moment, but the Liberals and Nationals are in coalition. The Nationals are definitely telling journalists that they're unhappy with Bridget McKenzie. They're raising talk of leadership spills for the deputy position. Is this frustrating for you as part of the coalition, as part of the government?
Well, our coalition is providing certainty and stability for Australia. That's the important thing that we're doing. I think in relation to this dairy bill, we should all claim credit for it as part of the Morrison-McCormick government, because it's a bill that's designed to make life better for dairy farmers. And in the context of the drought, in the context of an agricultural sector that's doing it tough, we should be out there supporting that sector. And that's what Bridget McKenzie is doing every single day, and that's what I and my colleagues are doing every single day too.
Does this kind of story, this speculation, show that the national parties are really feeling the heat from their constituents in rural and regional Australia? I mean, there is no greater issue than the drought, and we know that some are not happy with the way it's being handled.
Look, I think we have to acknowledge this is one of the worst droughts on record. And, you've seen the Prime Minister, you've seen the Deputy Prime Minister, you've seen Minister Littleproud and Josh Frydenberg and Minister McKenzie and a whole range of others go out and talk to farmers. It's why we made the $100 million additional announcement on top of the $7 billion drought fund we were already putting forward there. It's why the changes have been made to the farming household allowance package. We are listening. We are very concerned about what's happening there, and we're putting in place measures to try and deal with the drought today, tomorrow and into the future.
All right, well, Anika Wells, Labor is no stranger to leadership turmoil. No party really is in this place. But more broadly on the drought, Labor has been very critical of the way the coalition is responding to this terrible drought in rural and regional Australia. But what does Labor actually want the government to be doing beyond, somehow making it rain?
Well, we've asked for a War Cabinet to be convened, which would be bipartisan, 15 members, with the government to have the majority of members. And that's to give this issue the gravitas that it deserves. As Julian said, this is reaching the point where it's in a national emergency. We've got farmers being driven out of their communities. Towns are running out of water. We're potentially facing a sustainable food crisis. We need to act in a bipartisan way and give this issue the gravitas it deserves. And Labor was leading by asking for bipartisanship. It's disappointing that we haven't been taken up on that offer.
So one of the calls, I suppose, that Labor has been making is sort of extending welfare payments. I mean, is there anything more that we can really be doing apart from sort of handing money to farmers? And is that responsible economic management?
It's interesting that you say that, because we're asking for the government to do more, and that demonstrates that the government isn't doing enough. That's what our regional members are being told by farmers.
But can Labor articulate what more is in this situation?
Well, I'll pick you up on the example that Julian used just before, by way of example. This dairy code of conduct that's now the issue of hot dispute today around the building, the PM was able to put a sugar code of conduct in overnight when he needed Pauline Hanson's vote in the Senate. This has now been a recommendation by the ACCC. The ACCC made a number of recommendations about the dairy industry and about making things easier for farmers. We're 18 months on from that report being handed down and nothing's been done. This is a government that asks for review after review after review. They keep the report hidden and then they don't execute the recommendations.
All right, Anika's tried to have it both ways here. She's telling us on the one hand that the Labor Party wants bipartisanship on the drought, on the other hand she's playing politics with it. If the Labor Party really wants to help in relation to the drought, they can put some pressure, you as a Queensland MP in particular, on the Queensland government to go out and do what New South Wales has done and announce the construction of some dams so they can take advantage of some of the money that the federal government has put on the table.
But Tony Abbott, when he was PM in the first term of this third term government, announced 100 dams, and as of today they haven't built a single one. So it's not the state government that's dragging its feet. It's the lack of 100 dams failing to be executed by a federal government in its third term.
Dams are fundamentally the responsibility of the state governments.
Then why have the PM announced 100?
We put money on the table. It's that the states haven't taken up. And Queensland, which is one of the driest states in the Commonwealth, has done nothing in relation to this, and we need to get on and build some dams so when the next drought comes, we've actually prepared for it.
All right, moving on from the dam issue to another domestic issue that has kind of gone quiet recently, and that's the push for Indigenous constitutional recognition. Julie and Lisa, you were on the committee that has really investigated this issue and come up with a range of recommendations. But the minister responsible, Ken White, has laid out a plan for a referendum in this term of Parliament, and this week we're expecting him to lay out sort of the pathway, a model. Julie and Lisa, do you believe, having seen how the debate has developed in recent months, that a minimalist change to the Constitution is all that's going to really be palatable to the Australian public?
Well, I think we're a long way from a referendum on the Constitution here. Ken White is implementing the recommendations that the Joint Select Committee that I chaired with Pat Dodson last year has recommended, and he's implementing them in the order in which they are to be recommended. That is, co-design first. When the co-design process is completed, then we look at the legal form in which the bodies might take. This is a difficult process. It's a process that requires lots of consultation even to get the co-design going. But it's important that we get it right because we want this to make a difference to Indigenous people on the ground and we want them to have buy-in. There's no point giving Indigenous people another Canberra knows best solution to the challenges that face them.
But we know that Indigenous communities want an enshrined Indigenous advisory body in the Constitution. They want it enshrined in the Constitution. That is clearly unpalatable, at least to your party. We're now hearing that perhaps it'll be a legislated body. Is that something that would be, enough for you?
Well, again, Jane, we're putting the cart before the horse here. There's still a great vagueness around what the bodies look like. We started off with discussions about a national body, but out of the Joint Select Committee, we recommended that actually, because we heard this as we went around the country, that people are actually really focused on local and regional bodies, and that's what the co-design process is supposed to look at. So let's get the co-design out and running. This will take some time, and then let's consider those issues of constitutional.
Do you think we're on track for a referendum in this term of Parliament?
Look, I don't know what the Minister has in mind specifically in relation to that, but I know he has in mind bringing forward the co-design process. That is consistent with the recommendations that we've made, and I think that's the appropriate course to adopt. All
right, well, Anika Wells, on this, there's bipartisanship, of course, for constitutional recognition, but Labor has very much aligned itself with the Uluru Statement, with the substantial change to the Constitution, with the enshrined advisory body in the Constitution.
Yes.
If that's not what is put forward, would Labor stand in the way of basically getting a referendum along those lines?
Well, I don't want to hope that we're in a position where we have to consider that. I would hope that we're still in a position where we can get constitutional recognition because that's what Indigenous elders want. And I think we should all be doing more listening to our Indigenous elders who have been quite vocal in the past few days about the flagged model being proposed by our Indigenous minister. I heard on Radio National this morning, because I love my ABC and I was listening to Radio National, they were very concerned, and they were vocally concerned, that they are not being listened to. I mean, they've worked for 10 years to get to this point. So I'd hope that we wouldn't rush the process now and that we would do what our elders are asking us to do. That's what, as their representatives, we should do.
Okay, just wanted to ask you one other issue. I understand it came up in caucus today, and it's about press freedom. We know that there's a big debate about sort of creeping secrecy, about the balance between the public's right to know and national security. But Mark Dreyfus, the Shadow Attorney General, appears to have sort of shifted his position on exemptions for journalists. He is appearing to now advocate exempting journalists from national security laws when they're writing stories of public interest. Do you think that that is a sort of a risky route to be taking, to exempt a profession from national security laws?
Well, I don't know where that's come from. Obviously, I can't speak about what goes on in caucus, but what we did notice in question time yesterday, and what I'm hotly anticipating in question time again today, is the AG came out several months ago and said that he would be the person at the end of the day who would decide whether or not charges would be pressed. But the PM came out in question time yesterday and said that no politician should be in charge of that. So who is actually in charge of that decision? Is it the PM or is it the AG?
Can you answer that, Julie and Lisa?
Well, Jane, I sit on the Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, which is actually conducting the inquiry at the moment into these matters. And it's a difficult balancing act because fundamental to any democracy is freedom of the press, but also fundamental to a democracy is protecting the state and the citizens through national security laws and so on. And we're trying to work out exactly where the balance lies here. I think you've seen in recent weeks both the Home Affairs Minister announce some directions in relation to the AFP in their dealings with journalists and the Attorney only announcing directions in relation to prosecuting authorities in relation to journalists. We're going to work through some of those issues on the committee, and we'll come up with a report later in the year, and I don't want to preempt exactly where we're going to go.
But it is true, though, given those directives, that so there are 3 journalists in question right now who are facing possible prosecution. We have no idea whether that's actually going to be happening, but it will be the Attorney General, Christian Porter, who will give the go-ahead or otherwise for that prosecution, won't it?
I think it's to be remembered what these matters are about in the first place is not about the journalists, it's about Commonwealth officials who had access to classified information, who've dealt with that classified information in a way that allegedly has breached the laws of the country. And I think that is the real issue that the courts are determining here. It's not about the journalists.
But isn't it about the journalists,
It often gets lost in the discussion.
Yes, of course, but it's also, I suppose, in this case, about the journalists who have been in receipt of these documents, and so is that an offence, and so that's what the AFP is currently determining. It's unclear whether they are going to be charging the journalists, but is it not a fact that, given the directive that Christian Porter has issued, that if the AFP wants to charge them, it'll be Christian Porter who'll say, go ahead, or, stop?
Well, the AFP is under the responsibility of Peter Dutton. Christian Porter is responsible for the prosecuting authorities, and they've both issued directives which I think indicate where they might be going, where they will ultimately exercise their powers matter for them.
All right, well, Anika Wells, just to go back to the point originally, but should journalists be exempted from national security laws? Do you think that is an idea worth considering?
An idea worth considering. It's a big hypothetical. It's a big hypothetical
Well, it's
to
one
throw.
that Mike Dreyfus is now raising.
And again, I don't mean to obfuscate, but I don't know where that's come from. I think right to know is important. It is being discussed around the building today. It should be discussed around the country. We want a bit clearer direction from this government about what's going to happen. And these 3 journalists, I think they dispute, on behalf of Anikas everywhere, I think they dispute that it's not about them when it's them living a life where they don't know whether or not they are going to face criminal charges. I think it's about journalists when they're going to be faced with criminal charges, and about, who is it in government who ultimately makes that decision. It's still not clear.
Yep, all right, well, sadly, question time is quickly approaching, so we'll have to...
Got to run.
Anika Wells, Lilley said thank you so much for your time, and we'll await with great interest the report from the Joint Parliamentary Committee, so thank you for your time.
Thank you.